Adolf Hitler and his ceremonial Mercedes 770K. De Gaulle and his DS-19. John Paul II and his Popemobiles. Donald Trump and the Beast, his ultra-secure limousine. All these heads of state have made history, and they have all brought their motor cars into the great book of automobiles.
The DS-19 is also the car that saved General de Gaulle's life.
The DS-19 was not armored, but it was equipped with a revolutionary type of suspension. 55 years after the Petit Clamart assassination attempt, the car builder reveals the secrets of a technology that may have saved the Republic.
In spite of having two punctured tires, the car was able to remain stable thanks to the hydraulic suspension.
The vehicles of heads of state, marks of prestige.
Unlike the 4x4 Class G series, the Mercedes star emblem is not chrome-plated but gold-plated.
The cars were sometimes propaganda tools.
The mere fact of showing himself riding in this sort of vehicle shows that he is a man abreast of technological progress.
Power on four wheels, pushed to extremes, as in the armored Mercedes 770K.
It was the largest, the most imposing, and the most expensive Mercedes ever built at that time.
And sometimes cars made to measure.
But imagine, if you will, if you had a blank piece of paper and an unlimited budget, and somebody said, I want you to create the most safe and secure passenger vehicle imaginable.
For the automobile of American presidents since Barack Obama, the American government has invested 14 million euros and redoubled the most stringent tests. Thicker than ever anti-mine armor, ever more powerful engines inspired by aircraft technology and motor racing.
And the compressor was a spin-off from motor racing, allowing increased performance.
On board the presidential motor cars, when power meets technology, an investigation into the secrets of these automobiles which have left their mark on history. 1918. Europe was emerging from the Great War bled dry. While the United States was already making a people's car, the Model T Ford, back on the old continent, only the moneyed class could afford this luxury. In Germany, the brands were Opel, Audi, and of course, Benz, Daimler, and Mercedes. They could cost then up to the equivalent of 100,000 euros today, an impossible price to pay for a corporal, one Adolf Hitler.
Hitler had been very fond of motor cars since the end of the Great War. But he was poor. He didn't have any money. And he didn't have a job when he arrived in Munich.
From 1919 onwards, Hitler began his meteoric political rise that would lead him in less than 2 years to the head of the Nazi Party, the NSDAP, a position that allowed him a certain number of advantages.
The Nazi Party was financed by Munich's industrial and financial bourgeoisie. And using the funds allocated to it, Hitler could equip the party, rent halls for political meetings, acquire a newspaper as a mouthpiece for the party, and he could also buy a car.
This car, paid for by the National Socialist Party in 1920, was a 24-horsepower Selva 620, a make which no longer exists. But very soon, Hitler was to change models after a decisive meeting.
There was an element of chance which intervened, in that the Nazi Party journal was printed in a building in an inner suburb of Munich, in a district called Maxvorstadt, and in this building there was also a Mercedes car showroom.
And the head salesman of the Benz showroom, Jacob Verlin, showed him the Benz models. Hitler realized straight away that he should get rid of his Selva. He absolutely must have a Benz.
The dealer convinced Hitler. In September 1923, he bought from him his first Mercedes-Benz, the 1030 model, more luxurious, faster, and twice as powerful as the Selva. Then he bought the 1650. He didn't enjoy it for long. It was confiscated 2 months later when he was arrested and thrown into prison for an attempted putsch in Bavaria. Then followed 9 months of detention, during which he wrote the outline of Mein Kampf. But from his fortress, Hitler also kept up a regular correspondence with his car dealer.
He asked whether this or that model in which he was interested could be bought at a reduced price, a discount which Mercedes would offer because, after all, he was an important political personality, and so he asked for a deal, if you like, on the purchase of his car. As he said to his dealer, "Listen, I'm expecting considerable royalties on my book, but I have to say that a discount of a few thousand marks would help me buy the car for myself."
Jacob Verlin, the car dealer, was to become a confidant of the future dictator. He supplied his Mercedes-Benz cars right up to his fall from power, models which became bigger and bigger as he rose in influence. The Model 1140, which he bought on leaving prison, then the 1570 with 70 horsepower less than a year afterwards. In this luxurious car, he covered over 370,000 miles across Germany. But Hitler's name soon became associated with one model, which he abandoned only rarely until his death, the Mercedes 770. In Germany, in Sinsheim, near Stuttgart, the Automobile and Technical Museum is one of the largest private museums in Europe. Among the thousands of rare cars, the dictator's last Mercedes are preserved in perfect condition. All were based on the design of the Mercedes 770, launched by the maker in 1930. In all, 205 models were built up until 1943.
This car is a Mercedes 770K. It's a ceremonial car used by the Reich in 1938. As you can see, it's a convertible, very rare.
The Model K, which is armored, was produced from 1938 onwards. There are only 12 left in the world. The population called it Große Mercedes, the Grand Mercedes. It was at that time the biggest and most expensive car, so expensive that its price didn't appear in the catalog. A monster of a car like its owner. Monstrous in its size, 6 meters long, 2 meters 20 wide, and 1 meter 70 high. And in its weight as well, 4.8 tons unladen. Its huge gasoline tank had a capacity of 300 liters for a range of only 500 kilometers. Grand Mercedes used 60 liters of gasoline for a distance of 100 kilometers. Adolf Hitler's automobile was, then, the heaviest in the world, due to the model's imposing size for the time, but also because the dictator, from 1939 onwards, only traveled in armored cars. And again, it was Mercedes, the pioneer in the subject, that took it on. The Stuttgart firm built an entirely armored version of the 770. The whole of the bodywork was in 18mm steel. The body floor was reinforced with an 11mm steel plate designed to withstand the explosion of 500 grams of dynamite. The 12-centimeter thick doors weighed 150 kilos each, equivalent to the weight of 8 normal doors. The windows, made of superimposed sheets of glass, were 4.5 centimeters thick and also bulletproof.
The crazy thing about this car was that it was armored. Even at the floor level, it was mine-proof. But the statesman wasn't protected above the waist, because it was a convertible. It doesn't make sense.
Hitler was convinced he was aided, abetted, and watched over by a lucky star. If he could drive in state for hours unprotected without getting shot, it was obvious that he was the chosen one. Not only by the German people, but also by history, by which he meant a higher being, which he called fate.
Fate or fear, none of the dozens of assassination attempts were aimed at the Nazi leader while he was in his cars. With this convertible model, Hitler created part of his personality cult. It was his pedestal on which he would always show himself off.
Remember that Hitler was fascinated by ancient Rome. He was an autodidact who read an enormous amount on the history of antiquity, and particularly on the history of ancient Rome. And of course, he knew the ritual of triumph. Charmed by this image of the imperial Caesar, poised upright on his chariot, with his slave behind him holding the laurel wreath over his chief's head, Hitler wanted to imitate this Roman symbol.
Dictators need symbols to represent their power. In the old days, kings sat on thrones, and for Hitler, it was his car.
For this car to become the perfect propaganda tool, Mercedes made a small adaptation, which changed everything.
Könnte man diesen Sitz hier,
You can raise this seat.
und dann sehen wir hier ein Podest.
Then you can see the step on which Hitler could show his power and his strength.
Seine Macht und seine Größe zu demonstrieren. Dieses
This
Podest
step gives you an extra 13 centimeters.
als der Fahrgastraumboden.
With this step, the dictator, who was 1.73 meters tall, could stand up to 2.40 meters high and look down on the crowds. But although he used the convertibles for ceremonial occasions, he used closed limousines for making long journeys, 1.5 million kilometers in 20 years. His last limousine was this model. It's an armored 770K, the same model as the ceremonial Mercedes, but with a roof.
Autotechnikmuseum.
This Mercedes in the Automobile and Technical Museum of Sinsheim was built in 1943. It's a car with reinforced armor. You can see by the doors.
Hier an den Türen.
Only 19 of this model of closed armored limousines were made. And its size is just as imposing as the one used for ceremonial occasions. It measures 6 meters long by 2.50 meters wide by 1.8 meters high, and it weighs 5 tons.
Es gibt auch noch eine Besonderheit.
There's also a small refinement.
Hier der Fahrer.
Here, the driver can unlock a mechanism which closes completely the rear window.
Wo dieses Fenster hinten im Rückbereich sieht man jetzt.
The driver can operate it to protect the passengers.
Ausmachen, die Person hinten zu schützen.
This steel mechanism can protect passengers' necks against bullets. And finally, to prevent any attack, the maker also provided puncture-proof tires. They are rubber, but with a honeycomb design based on 20 independent chambers. If one or two explode, the tire retains its effectiveness. But the weight is a drawback. Each wheel weighs about 100 kilos, 5 times more than a normal wheel.
Dass die sich damals
And this spare wheel is so heavy that at that time, they invented a system to assist a wheel change.
dieses Ersatzrad zu wechseln. Man löst hier die Schrauben.
You unscrew here, that's the lock.
Und dann ist ein Mann
And then one man can take out this wheel,
100 Kilo schwer.
weighing more than 100 kilograms.
Federkraft unterstützt. Kann man das hier
Supported by the strength of the spring, you can take it out like this and put it down into the position required in order to change the wheel.
den Radwechsel zu vollziehen.
To power this 5-ton monster, Mercedes called in help for the engine from one Ferdinand Porsche, a brilliant engineer, self-taught, mad about car racing. He trained with Benz, then with Mercedes, before creating his own make. For the 770 model, Porsche introduced a motor based on racing car technology. The engine has 8 7.7-liter cylinders in line. It develops the exceptional power of 400 horsepower, as much as a racing car. At that time, standard cars like the Citroën Traction in France did no better than 32 horsepower. Ferdinand Porsche added a further refinement, characteristic to V8 engines: double ignition, 16 spark plugs, 2 to each cylinder. This technology, very uncommon at the time, allows both an increase in the engine output and guarantees its reliability. If one spark plug is faulty, the other one takes over. The dictator's car must not break down.
The innovation in the manufacture of the engine was in both the high quality of the assembly, rare for the time, practically Swiss watch precision, combined with a quality of metal alloy hardly used at the time apart from in competition cars, and which allowed high output without the usual problems of wear or heat, or of early overheating.
To get up to 400 horsepower, 8 cylinders were not enough. So the engineers at Mercedes added a compressor, which up to that time had only been used in aeronautics or competition cars.
Also hier auf der rechten Seite vom Motor.
Here on the right side of the motor, we have the carburetor of this big Mercedes engine,
Gaser von diesem großen Mercedes-Motor
linked directly to the large compressor here.
mit dem großen Kompressor hier vorne liegend.
Its compressor technology was thought up by the Frenchman Louis Renault. The principle is simple. Air taken from outside is compressed in this part of the engine, then injected into the cylinders. The compressed air multiplies tenfold the energy on explosion. That is how an engine of 250 horsepower can reach 400 horsepower. "74 years after it came out of the factory, Adolf Hitler's Mercedes 770K is still running. With its outsized consumption of 60 liters per 100 kilometers, it can reach a speed of 180 kilometers an hour, thanks to its compressor, which is mechanically activated.
Den Kompressor betätigt man
To activate the compressor,
über ein 2-Stufen.
you use a pedal with 2 levels.
Und zwar, man fährt bis zum gewissen Widerstand, kann man
You depress the pedal until you feel a slight resistance. And if you press against this resistance, the compressor is activated.
Kompressor zum Einsatz bringen.
Adolf Hitler, who was fascinated by mechanical innovations, spent a lot of time at car shows. It was he, too, who dreamed up the large-scale manufacture of a people's car, the Volkswagen, which first came off the production line 3 years after the end of the Reich. But for all this, the dictator never drove his own vehicles.
Hitler didn't have a driver's license, and that's quite interesting because in German the name for a driver's license is Das Führerschein. Even today, Das Führerschein translates literally as driver attestation, and the driver, der Führer, is also the chief, der Führer. So you see here, we have a Führer who doesn't have Führerschein. You see?
When the Reich fell, part of Hitler's automobile pool was seized at his residence in Berchtesgaden by General Leclerc's armored 2nd Division. Among the spoils of war was the famous Mercedes 770K. General Leclerc offered the ceremonial model to his comrade-at-arms, General de Gaulle. The liberator of France used it only once, on the 13th of June 1948, during a visit to Nevers, in homage to General Leclerc. That is because General de Gaulle preferred riding in Citroën tractions. One of them is preserved at the memorial to General Charles de Gaulle at Colombey-les-Deux-Églises. Matthew Jaja, historian and curator of the museum, takes us on a tour of the vehicles of France's liberator.
General de Gaulle used the traction at the time of the liberation of France during the period 1945-1946. In fact, until he chose to step down from the provisional government of the French Republic. And it was this car that was to accompany him during his 12 years in the desert.
The traction, the leading model of the French manufacturer, was launched in 1934. By turns the car of gangsters, the Third Republic, then the Gestapo and the Resistance, it is renowned for its road-holding and its revolutionary technology. For the first time on a mass-produced car, the engine was positioned at the front. The front-wheel traction gave driver comfort and safety. It was Charles de Gaulle's companion from 1946 to 1948.
And so it was aboard this same vehicle that he returned to power in 1958 when he was called by the President of the Republic. And this same car drove into the courtyard of the Élysée when he was nominated President of the Council. It's actually the car which symbolizes his return to power in 1958.
From that moment on, it was to be expected that General de Gaulle should favor a replacement from the range when the traction ceased production to be replaced by the famous DS.
One of the first measures he took when he arrived in 1958, I think in the days following his arrival, was to order DS cars.
The DS-19, to be precise. It was to accompany the general for his whole life. This is his last DS, the one he used from 1962 until he left the Élysée in 1969. These days it belongs to Michel Offre, who collects the general's memorabilia.
I knew of this car in 1979. It was bought by a friend who was already getting on in years. This friend decided to sell the car, and I was able to buy it in 1992.
The DS-19 was produced from 1955 on, right in Paris, in the Citroën factory on the Quai de Javel. It was designed by Flaminio Bertoni, the greatest car designer of the time. It was he who created the shapes of the 2CV and the traction avant. The DS was for 20 years the flagship model of the make, with over 1,400,000 cars sold. With its unusual line and its technical innovations, the DS became the mark of opulence and growth of the 30 glorious years.
When it first came out, people thought it was very futuristic, a UFO even. They christened it the Frog because of the shape of its bonnet. It was nothing like previous models of cars. The cars then were very square, and the traction was already a bit different with its prominent wings. Here, everything was encompassed. The wings were closed in, and people found it very peculiar. Many people were wary of it to start with, but even so, it was enormously successful right from the start.
And it was utter chaos because at the end of the first day of the Paris Salon, there were 7,500 firm orders.
The DS seduced everybody and marked a turning point in technology.
The real technical revolution in the DS was the hydraulic servo system. This allowed a whole system of equipment to function in a new and much more efficient way. The hydraulic servo system worked for braking, shock absorbers, and also for assisted steering, which was beginning to appear everywhere in cars.
Hydraulic brakes, hydraulic steering, and most remarkable of all, hydraulic suspension. It replaced the usual springs. There's a mineral liquid, green in color, which circulates around the car. It is contained in 5 spheres. 1 sphere for the gasoline tank, and 4 spheres connected to the wheels where it is mixed with liquid nitrogen. When the car comes to an obstacle, a pothole for example, the wheels compress the gas by means of a piston. It's the gas that absorbs the shock much more effectively than a spring could do, so the car remains horizontal. Here is a demonstration using General de Gaulle's car.
I turn the steering wheel with just 2 fingers. It's easy. Here we're coming to a bit of road where there are potholes. The car behaves very well for a 60-year-old. It's not bad at all.
What generations of DS drivers found fascinating was the ability to regulate for themselves the rigidity of the hydraulic shock absorbers.
Here we are in the lowest position. So now I'm putting it into the normal position. That's the position you use on the road. After that, depending on the difficulties and the state of the road, one can put it on position 2 or 3. You see, she's rising fast already. She's rigid. And when there's a puncture, you put it in the highest position. The last one.
5 positions, of which 3 are adjustable according to the state of the road. And for General de Gaulle's DS, Citroën provided a few adjustments, made to measure.
The roof was modified by Chaperon, who gave him a big electrically operated roof. This allowed the general to stand up in the car and wave to the crowd. This car was used mainly for his trips around the country and some of his Paris journeys. The roof was raised by 10 centimeters to accommodate the general's height. In the front on the bumper, you can see the slot for 2 pennants. One which was added for the general's pennant, the other for the president of another country. The pennant is carried on a chrome-plated brass pole. And this one is the logo for General de Gaulle. It has the Cross of Lorraine on it. Each president had his own logo. General de Gaulle had a favorite place in this car, the back right-hand side. So you see, when he came out of the Élysée or out of the Boisserie, the car was always positioned in a certain direction, so he could get into his seat. But often when Madame de Gaulle was with him, he left her that seat and sat alongside.
They were in these places when General de Gaulle's DS made history on the 22nd of August, 1962. On that day, at Petit Clamart, the car saved their lives during the assassination attempt.
Since July 1962, Algeria had been declared independent. Nevertheless, some of the supporters of French Algeria could not forgive General de Gaulle for having accepted and followed through the independence of Algeria, and intended to make him pay for it quite simply by making an attempt on his life, with the hope that this would defeat the regime of the Fifth Republic which he had created. That was the motivation of the OAS, the organization of the secret army, which stirred up unrest, prepared and directed this assassination attempt on General de Gaulle.
It was 7:45 in the evening when the presidential motorcade, composed of 2 DSs and 2 motorbikes, left the Élysée heading for the aerodrome of Villacoublay. Neither of the cars was armored. At 20:20, as the car was approaching the Petit Clamart crossroads, OAS terrorists opened fire on the procession. 2 tires were punctured. Some bullets went through the bodywork of the presidential car, but the 2 DSs managed to get away.
187 bullets were fired. About 15 of them hit the bodywork.
A 10-man commando, 187 bullets fired into unarmored bodywork. With an incredible stroke of luck, the presidential convoy even managed to dodge another car aimed at it, which was also a DS.
The vehicle nevertheless carried on for several kilometers until it reached Villacoublay Airport, which led General de Gaulle to say a few minutes later, speaking of the terrorists who tried to kill him, that they really didn't know how to use a gun, or else their aim was lousy.
And just for the record, you should know that there were chickens in the boot of the car. They were chickens for Madame de Gaulle, who once they arrived at the airport was anxious to know if the chickens were safe and sound.
They all survived. There's no doubt that luck, the skill of the presidential chauffeur, Francis Maroux, but also the advanced technology of the DS-19 all saved the life of the President of the Republic. Éric Letton is manager of the Citroën Conservatory at Aulnay-sous-Bois, where there are hundreds of old models of the make with the chevron emblem. To show the exceptional road holding of the DS, in spite of its 2 punctured tires, the technician has prepared a demonstration. He has reproduced the conditions of the assassination attempt using a standard DS-19, identical to the one used by the general.
We've deflated the tires of both the back right wheel and the front left one to match the bullets which came and punctured the tires. There they're flat. There's no more air in the tires. In spite of 2 punctured tires on the car, thanks to the oleopneumatic or hydraulic suspension if you prefer, the vehicle remains stable and the car's drivability and road holding are impeccable. And in my opinion, controlling a vehicle without the assisted steering, which existed at that time, would have been extremely difficult.
Thanks to the hydraulic system, the general's car could even have lost a wheel and continued without damage.
Now we've taken 1 wheel off the car to show that the car was capable of running on 3 wheels. In order to do this, we've put the car in the top position. As we saw just now, there were several height settings possible, so we've put it in the top position and we've made the whole thing rigid. So there everything is tight in the suspension and the chassis, so we can take away a wheel and still run like that.
Sufficient reason to merit General de Gaulle's loyalty to the DS, in spite of some people wishing him to take an armored car.
Following the Petit Clamart attack, it was suggested to General de Gaulle that he should take this vehicle, which is called a Renault Rambler Ambassador, proposed by the Minister of Interior, Roger Frey, but this was a vehicle for which the parts came from the United States before being assembled in Belgium, and General de Gaulle, who was not known for being pro-American, didn't appreciate this aspect and did not in the least admire the appearance of the vehicle. In addition, this vehicle was armored with bulletproof glass, as you can see from the weight and thickness of the doors, even though the bodywork had been designed by Henri Chaperon. There were also puncture-proof tires. General de Gaulle preferred to stay faithful to the DS-19, which saved his life on the 22nd of August, 1962, so much so that when this vehicle was presented to him, he is rumored to have said, "Where's my DS?" before adding that whoever ordered or paid for this vehicle should keep it and use it themselves, but that he, General de Gaulle, had no desire to use it. That's how he remained faithful to the DS until the end of his presidential mandate.
The general kept his DS-19 until he stepped down in November 1969. He gave way on only one little novelty, the DS-21 in its stretched version, modified by the famous bodywork designer Citroën and intended for parades.
This car was ordered in 1968 and delivered in 1969. It's a ceremonial car, not one for everyday use. It's really for parades. It's really carefully designed for slow speeds.
6 meters 53 long, with a glass partition separating the back seat passengers from the front.
So, the aide-de-camp takes his piece of paper, writes his reply on it, and puts it in this little letterbox so that the head of state in the back can collect it.
This car, designed to receive foreign heads of state, offers all the signs of interior luxury. The first guest, Jean Bedel Bokassa, future puppet emperor of the Central African state, must have been impressed by it, as was Richard Nixon, the American president.
The car was over-equipped, full of lavish extras for a head of state. But the general was really quite a simple man, and he preferred things to be done simply.
Full of lavish extras, but still not armored. Even after the Petit Clamart attack, not one of the president's DSs was made secure. It was as if the hydraulic suspension, which saved him once, was the equal of any protection imaginable. On the 9th of November 1970, General de Gaulle, retired from public life several months before, breathed his last. For his funeral, at the head of the procession was his wife Yvonne, in the DS-19. It is rare for a car, and a make of car, Citroën, to be so closely linked to the destiny of a president.
For a car maker, it's always beneficial to become known through the use of high-profile cars in prestigious situations. So we include in this category, for example, the motor cars of heads of state.
And if there is one head of state who has aroused the keen attention of all car makers, it is the Pope. He reigns over the smallest state in the world, but has the possibility of influencing hundreds of millions of the faithful. A godsend, which explains in part the generosity of the world's big car makers, sometimes with original vehicles.
The Pope receives his car as a gift. Perhaps one discusses not with the Pope himself, but with his entourage, what he would like and what he doesn't want. In general, the Pope wants a measure of discretion.
The story of the Popemobiles began in earnest between the wars, when the Vatican retrieved its independence, confiscated in 1870 at the time of the creation of modern Italy.
It was not before 1930 that the Pope began to travel. Not very far, but in Rome, because in 1929, the Latran Accords, signed with Mussolini, gave a certain number of guarantees and freedoms to the Pope, who no longer considered himself as a prisoner in the Vatican.
In 1930, Pope Pius XI received his first official vehicle. It was a gift from André Citroën. It was a C6, also known as a Lectoria, equipped with a small throne. This luxury 6-cylinder 42-horsepower model came directly from the Citroën's Italian factory. But with only 159 kilometers on the clock, she spent most of her time in the papal garage. Pius XI preferred a Mercedes, the more powerful Nürburgring 460 with 8 cylinders and 80 horsepower. Mercedes became the favored supplier to the papacy.
In reality, it was John Paul II, with his many trips across the world from 1978 onwards, who made the Popemobile popular.
No more ostentatious vehicles. The Popemobile took on a new look: white, simple, and not armored. The plexiglass passenger compartment was originally designed to protect him from the weather. The first contemporary Popemobile is kept in Stuttgart in Germany, in the Mercedes Museum. John Paul II used it during his trip to Germany in 1980.
Ja, wir sehen hier das Popemobil.
Here we have the 1980 Popemobile, built on a Mercedes Class G.
Des Mercedes-Benz G-Modells. Man würde heute G-Klasse sagen. Was man hier sehen kann, ist der
You can see here the large structure in plexiglass.
Aufbau. Der Sitz, auf dem der Papst
The Pope's seat,
ist höhenverstellbar.
which is adjustable in height,
Wir haben aber auch
and there's also room for his Vatican collaborators to sit down.
die mit dem Papst im Wagen sitzen und der
And he could keep in contact with the driver via this microphone.
Mikrofon dort aufrechterhalten.
This Popemobile is 4 meters 60 long, 1 meter 83 wide, and 2 meters 80 high. It has a 4-cylinder, 100 horsepower engine, but it can only reach a speed of 130 kilometers an hour, quite sufficient for the Pope's parades. To make this Popemobile, the maker's engineers adapted a standard 4x4 Class G. The Class G first appeared in 1979. It's an all-terrain vehicle derived from a military model created a few years earlier for the Shah of Iran. After winning the 1983 Paris-Dakar, this 4x4 gained an international reputation. The Vatican was won over by the robustness of this model and its chassis. It was presented with a standard Class G, neither armored nor equipped with security features.
Das liegt daran, dass es
Its design was fitting.
geeignet war. Der Geländewagen
The all-terrain vehicle had a chassis which could be combined with a multitude of different bodies.
kombinierbar war und deswegen
That's why it was chosen,
auch besonders gut geeignet,
so that it could support the weight of the heavy plexiglass structure.
aufzunehmen.
Until the 13th of May 1981, this structure was not put in place unless there was a risk of rain. And on this 13th of May, the sun was shining on St. Peter's Square in Rome. At 1717, a man, commissioned by the Soviets or nationalist Turks, we still don't know, appeared suddenly out of the crowd and took several shots at the Pope without the least hindrance. John Paul II was miraculously spared, in spite of a serious wound in the abdomen. Since then, a screen of bulletproof reinforced plexiglass is the Pope's travel companion, whatever the weather.
The big difference between before and after the attack is that there are now security measures. There's a certain number of heavily armed policemen, but they're not in view, who follow the papal car and precede it, and the car itself is reinforced.
In spite of the attack, the Pope's car is still not armored. But now the Popemobile is permanently surmounted by its bulletproof screen. It's reinforced plexiglass 4 centimeters thick. On the other hand, as papal etiquette commands, the standard car is sometimes equipped with the most unusual refinements.
Im Gegensatz zum serienmäßigen
And unlike the standard Model G, the Mercedes star emblem is not chrome-plated, but gold-plated.
gilt übrigens auch für
The same thing for the wheel rims.
ebenfalls
They also are gold-plated, and it's important for the general look of the car.
Gesamteindruck des Fahrzeugs bei.
And another great feature is the handholds for the bodyguards, to enable them to protect the Pope during his tour.
Tour beschützen konnten.
Although Mercedes has a special relationship with the Vatican, Peugeot has also worked on a papal vehicle on the occasion of 2 official visits to France in the 80s. The last model is still exhibited in Peugeot's Adventure Museum at Sochaux in the east of France.
We're in the 504 pickup, which was built by Peugeot for the second visit of the Pope to France when he came to Alsace-Lorraine in 1988. The pickup 504 was chosen because it lends itself easily to having a platform positioned on it where the Pope will take his place and be seen by all his followers. The Pope's head must be 2 meters 60 from the ground.
This 62 horsepower pickup is notable for its solid chassis, which can carry the new bulletproof screen in plexiglass.
The construction of this plexiglass cage involves panels which are 4 centimeters thick and which will provide protection to the Pope even from shots from light handguns.
The Pope De Gaulle, Hitler, the cars of heads of state are one of the favorite targets for perpetrators of assassination attempts. Security services have little by little come to treat them as a priority. The assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy on the 22nd of November 1963 in Dallas, while he was in a convoy in his Lincoln Continental convertible, was a watershed in the history of the automobile. The Secret Services, with the Americans in the lead, were prompted to revise from top to bottom the security arrangements for heads of state.
We've seen that change come about from his assassination. Directly after that, there was no more convertible top. That we've seen the evolution happen with the presidential fleet.
The limousines were not permanently put out to pasture. For economic reasons, they were armored by a bodywork specialist who also added a roof. They were in use for 13 more years by successive presidents. Since 2009 and the investiture of Barack Obama, the American presidential motor car seems infallible. It's known as the Beast. There are 10 of them. It's the most secure car in the world. Even its design remains a secret, shared only by the Secret Service and the American car builder, General Motors. But two automobile specialists, Joseph Otero, who trains armored car drivers, and Trent Kendall, skilled in armoring cars, tried to decipher for us the secret of the Beast.
The current presidential armored vehicle, which President Trump is using, it's not your regular car chassis, so it's based on a big truck chassis, and then they built this armored vehicle on that truck chassis.
A lot of the details about what is now commonly referred to as the Beast are classified, but imagine, if you will, if you had a blank piece of paper and an unlimited budget and somebody said, I want you to create the most safe and secure passenger vehicle imaginable.
In all, the government spent 14 million euros on developing this vehicle. Each model costs more than €1 million. The American monster measures 6 meters in length and weighs nearly 7 tons, the weight being due to the vehicle's armor plating of almost 20 centimeters. You hear tales of doors weighing as much as Boeing doors, impossible to open from inside. In spite of having a V8 engine developing 300 horsepower, the car's top speed is 96 kilometers an hour. But all of these details are mere speculation. General Motors gives no information for security reasons. In the United States, in the state of Texas, we find the Texas Armoring Corporation, specialist in armoring vehicles, some of which are destined for heads of states on all 5 continents. Its boss revealed to us some of the secrets of this technological monster. To begin with, a standard car, but in the workshop, it will undergo a whole series of transformations.
So this vehicle is being stripped right now. It's completely, we're taking all the interior out of the vehicle. So the carpet, the headliner, the dash, everything will be removed from this vehicle.
Each part of the vehicle is carefully cataloged and stocked. The second stage can now begin, the armoring.
When we armor a vehicle, we're putting ballistic steel in every part of the vehicle. So you have it in the door, you have it in the floor of the vehicle, you have it in the roof, and then every pillar post also has it all installed. So all these places, right, like this, have steel inside. So it's 100% completely armored.
Ballistic steel is a mixture of iron, carbon, chrome, or nickel. It can be thinner or thicker depending on the type of protection required. The American president's car is thought to comprise an armor of more than 20 centimeters thick, resistant to a mine explosion and shots from war-grade weapons. For each car, the armor is created to measure. Cutting, polishing, and precision fitting. All that remains is to replace the original windows with bulletproof glass. This is a delicate operation. The glass is very heavy.
So this is the ballistic glass. It's basically the back window for one of these Escalades. And it's approximately 60 pounds in weight. It's 40 millimeters thick, and it's going to stop AK-47, M16, that type of assault rifle.
For the Beast, the car created for Barack Obama, then for Donald Trump, the windows are said to be composed of 5 layers of glass with a total thickness of 20 centimeters, between which there would be films of polycarbonate, a highly resistant plastic product. This technology has already been proven effective. The industry is going to repeat the test on a sample of 20-centimeter thick glass using war-grade weapons.
So this weapon is a variant of the AK-47. It was actually produced by the famous Russian engineer Kalashnikov.
For conformity certification, the gunman must follow a very precise procedure.
The glass was rated for 3 shots inside of a 120-millimeter triangle. That's how they laboratory test the armor to make sure that it's certified to defeat those certain munitions.
So we shot this glass 3 times with the AK-47. The first impact barely broke through the layers of glass, and then you can actually see some of the other impacts going a little bit deeper into the glass. You can actually see that the first layer of glass is all broken here, and then we'll pull out this piece of bullet. It's just a small piece of it that actually gets broken up into smaller pieces as it goes inside. And then you can see some of the other glass just falling out of there.
As it penetrates the first layers of the glass, the bullet is shattered. That's the point of the multi-layered structure. The bullet, propelled at 2,500 kilometers per hour, acquires a force which breaks the glass, but when it reaches the plastic film, the force is turned on the bullet, which then disintegrates.
This piece of glass can withstand probably about 50 shots of the same rifle. What the idea is to get the customer or our client out of a dangerous situation as quick as possible. So we're buying him time, is what we're doing.
Unbreakable windows, infallible bodywork, the Beast is indeed a whole system of exceptional protection. It carries several bags of the president's blood group. It can produce a smoke screen to throw off attackers, an electromagnetic shield capable of jamming all local signals, and also an oxygen cylinder to insulate the car in case of a bacteriological or a chemical attack. It takes nearly 4 months to completely transform a vehicle.
So this is completely armored. It's going to stop all the high-power rifles, the AK-47, the M16, grenades, any kind of IEDs, explosion underneath. It's going to be, the occupants are going to be fully protected.
But in order to guarantee the protection of presidents, there have to be top-class drivers capable of driving 7-ton vehicles with ease. The Beast is driven by Secret Service agents trained for driving. And in New York, we find the Tony Scotti Vehicle Dynamics Institute, the most highly reputed center in the world for training armored car drivers.
The president and the vice president are both protected by the Secret Service. And in fact, we've had the pleasure of training some of the Secret Service's evasive driving instructors.
To train his drivers, Joseph has elaborated 2 tests. The first consists of avoiding obstacles while driving at high speed.
We've got a sedan running through the slalom now, and this exercise allows them to feel the vehicle's cornering capabilities, what the vehicle feels like as it approaches its limits.
This armored sports vehicle weighs 5 tons, 3 times more than the equivalent commercial vehicle.
Big difference in the cornering capability, the weight, and even the length of the vehicle. So obviously the maximum speed at which we can drive through the exercise is going to be much lower. So let's go. We can go through at 80% of the vehicle's capability, which is approximately 28 miles an hour. Even though that seems slow to the average driver, when you're in such a heavy vehicle, you feel a lot more understeer. Got to make a lot more steering input to maintain control.
Even at a modest speed, in a slalom, the road holding of a 5-ton vehicle is difficult to master. During a turn, the car is subjected to a centrifugal force. It's this force which pulls the driver to the outside. It allows its turn, but it can also provoke a rollover. In an armored vehicle, much heavier, the center of gravity is positioned higher than normal. This centrifugal force, proportional to the height of the center of gravity, is thus much greater. And in the case of a sharp bend, and with no training, the driver can quickly lose control of the vehicle. The second test consists of a simulation of an ambush. In this case, it will take the form of a zigzag.
You've got to take speed off the vehicle using the brakes, and of course, once you've gotten the vehicle sorted out, you want to get back to the gas. You want to spend as little time as possible in that kill zone. Sure, so now we're going to do it at a higher speed, 48 miles an hour. If I'm a good bad guy, I'm going to do my best to limit your options to get out of that kill zone. Our job is to train drivers to be able to overcome the greatest amount of those obstacles that the adversary places in front of them in terms of time, distance, and maneuvering space. And doing that in a vehicle that is very heavy, may require some different techniques to get it to slow down or accelerate in order to maintain control in those environments.
Cautious braking, control of the acceleration, along with precision steering.
Speed is not survival, control is survival. And that's very important for these professional drivers to be able to operate at a very high range of the vehicle's performance capability in terms of cornering without losing control.
More haste, less control. This driving lesson sounds like a code of conduct for presidents. Since cars have existed, heads of state have made them a mark of their power, always at the technological forefront. Hitler chose German luxury and power by preference and to serve his propaganda machine. As for General de Gaulle, he remained faithful to the DS-19 avant-garde and symbol of the glorious 30 years. The image of John Paul II, the traveling pope, and his successors is now inseparable from that white car surmounted by a transparent shield, the Popemobile. Whereas the presidents of the United States have firmly opted for security and excess. Even today, the motor cars of heads of state combine technology and symbolism. Thus it is that Pope Francis has chosen an electric car, the Nissan Leaf, whereas the French president, Emmanuel Macron, with an allusion to history, has brought back the famous DS. The DS7 crossback diesel, 180 horsepower, but this time an armored DS.